The G7 is putting a spotlight on the Canadian Rockies.
Western powers converge in Alberta to talk conflict and commerce.
There's a lot of controversy with Trump coming here, just obviously based on the whole 51st state.
32,600 jobs vanished. Canada's steel and aluminum sectors are hemorrhaging. At the G7 summit in Alberta, a diplomatic explosion ignited, one that threatens to unravel North America's defense supply chain. This isn't just about trade barriers anymore. It's about loyalty. In just 48 hours, a trade skirmish escalated into a clash of ideologies, tariffs as dominance versus sovereignty as unyielding. President Trump, intensifying his stance with a staggering 50% tariff on Canadian metals, sparked factory closures and protests across Canada. From Vancouver to Halifax, the response was swift and fierce. But the true surprise wasn't Trump's move, it was Canada's new Prime Minister, Mark Carney, cool, composed, and cutting. With 5 words, he drew a line: Canada is not for sale. Now, Carney is taking the battle global, hauling the US to the WTO while Trump muses about inviting Russia back to the G7. The question isn't just about trade now, it's about alienation. Is America, in its pursuit of control, pushing away its closest allies, one tariff at a time? Stay with us. On June 16, 2025, as the G7 summit kicked off in Alberta, Trump unleashed a bombshell before the leaders could even pose for their group photo. On June 3, via executive order, he hiked tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum from 25% to 50%, effective June 4. This wasn't a gesture of negotiation, it was a declaration of economic war. Overnight, Canada's 23,000 steel and 9,500 aluminum jobs faced imminent danger. Unions and industry leaders warned of production halts and smelter closures. Alberta, meant to symbolize unity, became a cauldron of conflict. Steel plants in Calgary and Red Deer saw shifts grind to a halt by June 4. The supply chain for pipelines, railcars, and defense projects froze. Locals stared as massive blast furnaces went dark. Trump underscored his action with a stark ultimatum: accept my terms, or pay the cost. It wasn't just a statement, it was a gauntlet thrown down, leaving Canada with no room to maneuver. The fallout spread beyond steel, triggering layoffs, factory slowdowns, and fears of broader economic decline. Markets reacted instantly. Domestic steel prices surged 15% in days, inflating costs for everything from car manufacturing to infrastructure. Consumers now face pricier cars, canned goods, and appliances. The timing was brutal. Alberta was set to host talks on defense collaboration and supply chain stability. Instead, it became a battleground. A summit meant for harmony turned into a standoff. What began as a trade maneuver morphed into a geopolitical chess game, shaking Canada's core industries. This wasn't just economic, it was a psychological blow. It left Canadians and their American counterparts questioning whether a key ally could be bullied. For a nation rooted in cross-border partnership and trust, this was a tear in the national fabric. But this was only the opening act. Canada's response was coming, strategic, not reckless. We'll dive into Mark Carney's counterplay next and why it might redefine economic sovereignty and global market resilience. After the steel blow at the G7, Canada's response was measured, not fiery, but deliberate. On June 19, 2025, Prime Minister Mark Carney addressed the press in Ottawa, outlining Canada's strategy. Counter-tariffs on U.S. steel and aluminum would be recalibrated starting July 21, depending on G7 trade talks' progress. The message was clear and intentional. This wasn't empty rhetoric. Canada had already imposed 25% retaliatory tariffs on March 13, targeting $12.6 billion in U.S. steel and $3 billion in aluminum. Now, Carney tossed the challenge back to Trump: move forward by July 21, or face escalation. The stakes are evident. Canada supplies over 90% of its metals to the U.S., and counter-tariffs would squeeze American industries like automotive, aerospace, and defense. This move could pressure U.S. lawmakers in metal-reliant states. Carney's demeanor was steady, almost surgical, no rage, just strategy. He unveiled stronger domestic protections. Starting June 30, federal infrastructure and defense projects would prioritize Canadian-made steel and aluminum or imports from nations with mutual agreements. Canada also set tariff rate quotas for non-FTA countries, capped at 100% of 2024 import volumes, to block cheap metal from flooding its market. This isn't a simple back and forth. It's a redefinition of Canada's global stance. Carney is wielding economic policy as a geopolitical shield, trading it for U.S. concessions. At its heart, this is about safeguarding Canada's role as a vital link in the defense supply chain. As the top foreign supplier of steel and aluminum to the U.S., Canada fuels military vehicles, missiles, and infrastructure. Carney's July 21 deadline isn't just procedural, it's meant to force Washington's hand. Behind closed doors, Carney is laying tracks with the EU and Japan, pushing for a strategic minerals pact beyond U.S. influence. Lithium, nickel, and graphite, key to drones and radar, are entering a new security framework. This is a calculated play. Canada isn't appending the board, it's rearranging the pieces. Washington now faces a choice by July 21: sign a trade security pact to ensure materials, trust, and alliance, or push Canada to escalate tariffs and reroute critical supply lines in a tense global landscape, with Russia's G7 return looming. Carney's strategy isn't just about steel, it's about sovereignty, influence, and enduring resilience in global markets. Stay tuned as we explore how the G7 fractured not just economically but in trust and unity. The G7 summit reached a breaking point, not just over trade but over the essence of allied trust. On June 16, 2025, Trump stunned the summit by refusing to sign the G7's joint communiqué and abruptly leaving the dinner session. The move sent shockwaves through leaders expecting solidarity, not division. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen called the U.S. tariffs harmful to business and consumers, warning they act as taxes, disrupt supply chains, and breed economic uncertainty. Then Trump escalated, proposing to re-invite Russia to the G7 or even expand to include China, suggesting a G8 or G9. He implied Russia's absence may have fueled the Ukraine war, a remark that sparked outrage. Germany's chancellor tensed visibly. Carney, seated nearby, paused mid-sentence, closing his notebook. The mood shifted, it felt less like a summit and more like a fractured alliance. For the first time in G7 history, no joint statement emerged, no agreement, no unity. This isn't a minor crack, it's a chasm in the alliance's foundation. Carney later called the summit a G0, a quip with bite. A G7 without consensus isn't a G7. This failure echoes beyond Alberta's Rockies, signaling that global security hinges on coordinated defense and economic stability relies on aligned trade policies. For Canadians and Americans, this isn't abstract policy, it's real. It means unstable markets, uncertain trade routes, and doubts about defense partnerships. The optics are stark, allies are clashing, the U.S. president is questioning long-standing unity, and the summit ended with empty chairs and frustrated leaders. Canada, caught in the middle, made its move. But the G7's collapse raises a bigger question: can this alliance withstand pressure? Next, we'll turn to Canada's streets, where silent protests spoke louder than summit rhetoric, revealing public sentiment toward this crisis. Canada's response was a resounding silence that roared. By March 9, 2025, tens of thousands gathered on Parliament Hill in Ottawa and in Windsor's streets. No chants, no megaphones, just quiet determination with signs reading, "Allies don't kneel to pressure." Reuters captured the defiance, Canadians standing firm against Trump's tactics. The moment exploded online, with #NoTariffs trending across Canada on X, images of neighbors posting signs like, "Keep your hands off our supply chain," outside homes and factories went viral. A retired Saskatchewan teacher summed it up: Canada and the U.S. are neighbors, and neighbors don't tear down each other's fences. The phrase echoed across national media, encapsulating hurt, anger, and resolve. This wasn't fleeting fury. Provinces rallied, and local governments passed resolutions condemning the tariffs. The silent protests grew into coordinated political pressure. By late March, the movement reached provincial capitals. Businesses and unions, once hesitant, now openly supported Carney's stance, warning that entire communities tied to metal industries could collapse. This was about more than pride, it was about survival, with families, jobs, and pensions at stake. The optics bolstered Carney's strategy. He needed public support, and by rallying ordinary Canadians, he turned sentiment into leverage. No weapons, just unity. It worked. Federal MPs from all parties began pressing in Ottawa, demanding Carney hold firm. The question became, how far will Canada go to protect its industries and principles? This domestic pressure echoed globally. As Canada prepared to challenge the US at the WTO, allies from the EU to Japan watched a middle power rally its people and make waves without violence. In that silence, Canada found power. Carney knew this momentum would resonate in diplomatic circles. That quiet roar set the stage for the next act. We'll explore how this protest turned into a strategic strike at U.S. military supply chains, hitting harder than any tariff. The next blow struck America's military supply chain. In late June 2025, a Quebec City steel mill halted operations for 2 weeks. By mid-June, Canadian mills faced layoffs and paused production as U.S. buyers stopped orders amid tariff uncertainty. The 50% tariffs forced U.S. companies to halt mid-production purchases from Canada. The impact was swift but reverberated across the border. A Chicago appliance manufacturer announced a 2-week closure in mid-June when its Canadian steel supply dried up. Assembly lines stopped, stalling products for military and civilian use. This exposes a critical U.S. vulnerability. America's economy and military depend heavily on Canadian raw materials. From tanks to naval vessels to advanced radars, Canadian steel and aluminum are foundational to defense infrastructure. Without them, key projects stall. Experts call this a direct consequence of Trump's trade barriers. In 2023, Canada supplied 25% of U.S. steel and 50% of its aluminum. The June 4 tariff hike to 50% choked U.S. firms into supply chain dead ends. No metal, no production. No production, no defense readiness. This isn't just commercial, it's a strategic setback. While Canada pursues WTO cases and trade alliances, the U.S. falters. Suppliers scramble for alternatives, and military contractors warn of cost spikes and delays tied directly to the tariffs. The U.S. Department of Defense, reliant on Canadian metals for joint projects, feels the squeeze. Shipyards face delays, and contractors notify Congress of material shortages. Consumers will feel it too, higher costs for appliances, cars, homes, and even defense equipment. Analysts note that rising material costs divert budgets from innovation and training. The core issue, a trade policy meant to protect domestic industries, may have weakened national security. So, we ask you, should the U.S. pursue self-reliance in critical materials, or strengthen ties with Canada to secure vital supply chains? Stay tuned as we reveal how Carney didn't just react, he forged a new alliance to sidestep the U.S. and cement Canada's role as a global strategic supplier. Canada's response wasn't just defensive, it was proactive diplomacy. Instead of immediate retaliation, Carney raised the stakes globally, pressuring Washington through multilateral channels rather than matching its aggression. Canada had already laid groundwork months earlier, preparing for a prolonged economic fight. Now, Carney set a 60-day clock for resolution, threatening a massive trade showdown. But he didn't stop there. Behind the scenes, Canadian envoys reached out to the EU and Japan to form a critical minerals alliance, focusing on lithium, nickel, and graphite, essential for drones, radar, and electric vehicles. Canada and Japan had been discussing battery mineral security since September 2023, outside US-led frameworks. Carney accelerated these talks, securing deals to tighten supply within the alliance. From Washington's view, this pivot is concerning. White House officials warned of a potential energy cartel, but markets see it as strategic autonomy, a brilliant move. Canada isn't burning bridges, it's building new ones without waiting for US cooperation. Carney's strategy creates a parallel supply chain, shielding Canada from US trade volatility. It ensures reliable materials for missiles, jets, EVs, and wind turbines through trusted allies. Canada is also adopting procurement policies prioritizing these materials for defense and infrastructure. By July, Canada may fully embrace a Canada First sourcing policy. In weeks, Canada has shifted from defending itself to reshaping the global resource order, potentially neutralizing US leverage and rebalancing North American power around sovereignty and supply chains. The question looms: will the US dismantle its tariffs, or watch Canada and allies build a resilient network that could sideline America in its own backyard? Next, we'll explore how Canada's supply chain rebellion seeped into military cooperation, sealing this crisis with a symbolic, silent strike. The trade and diplomatic fronts were shaken, but the ripples reached military cooperation. During the G7 summit, Canada quietly adjusted protocols. The Royal Canadian Air Force scaled back support for U.S. military delegations and disrupted baggage transport on select flights, a subtle but pointed signal in defense circles. Behind closed doors, North American defense officials raised concerns within NORAD. The long seamless U.S.-Canada partnership faced closer scrutiny, with officials reviewing coordination protocols for unexpected shifts. On Parliament Hill, MPs proposed delaying joint energy infrastructure financing unless the U.S. reversed its tariffs, directly impacting shared energy security, a clear escalation from words to leverage. Carney delivered a sharp message: this crisis will end. The question is who pays the cost. His calm, calculated words underscored Canada's power and readiness to wield it. The shift in military posture, though subtle, carried weight, reminding allies and adversaries that defense ties rely on political stability. A delayed flight or disrupted shipment reveals cracks in once unshakable trust. As global threats grow and defense budgets tighten, trust between allies is paramount. Canada's quiet moves showed that economic pressure can shift strategic dynamics without firing a shot. This isn't a footnote, it's a reminder that in geopolitics, symbols speak louder than words. Defense cooperation, energy infrastructure, and alliance unity were all in play. Next, we'll unpack Carney's final act and ask, with this crisis winding down, who will pay the price, Washington or Canada? The G7 summit, meant to showcase unity, instead exposed divisions no tariff can mend. Carney, resolute yet measured, warned, this crisis will end. The question is who pays the cost? Hours later, in Pennsylvania, Trump doubled down, telling supporters tariffs would revive American steel. The higher the tariffs, the more likely they'll build here. Two leaders, two visions, and a world watching a power shift unfold. This fight isn't just about numbers, it's about who controls production, who commands supply chains, and who holds leverage without begging. What's next? Will the U.S. soften its stance, or risk losing not just deals but the trust of its closest ally? Will Canada hold back, or forge a coalition beyond Washington's reach? You tell us, who's paying the price, Trump, Carney, or the workers and families on both sides? Share your thoughts below. For more bold takes on global politics, economics, and defense, subscribe now. We're just getting started.